Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. Charles didn't do rescues. But when he heard the sharp crack of an energy bolt slice through the jungle air, his instincts kicked in. Before logic caught up, he moved fast. He found them in a clearing, 3 green-skinned attackers closing in on a woman who stood back to a thick-rooted tree. She didn't scream, her jaw was set in defiance. He admired that, right before he dropped the first 2 attackers with clean shots to the chest. The third turned too slow. Charles lunged, slammed the butt of his rifle into his skull. Silence followed. She didn't thank him. Instead, she stepped forward. "You shouldn't have interfered," she said. "Yeah," Charles replied, holstering his weapon. "I had it handled," she said. "Sure you did." He eyed her frame, her skin was a smooth green, not human. "Who are you?" he asked without looking back. "You'll find out." She walked past him, hips swaying like she owned the entire damn jungle. He followed, against years of operating solo and staying out of trouble, but something about her. She led him through a narrow pass, thick with hanging moss and strange flowers, until the trees opened to reveal something he didn't expect, just a stone structure. No crystal spires, no science fiction nonsense. Guards flanked the wide entryway, green-skinned and armored, stiffening at the sight of her. They bowed. Charles stopped cold. "You really don't know who I am, do you? Should I?" She stepped close. "I'm Queen Sivera," she whispered, "and you just saved my life." She stepped away and strode inside, her voice echoing back with a dangerous promise. "Follow me, mercenary. I owe you something personal." Charles followed her in without a word. The palace interior was cool and shadowed, a hard contrast to the jungle heat outside. No gleaming alien metals, no shimmering tech, just stone, carved and deliberate, shaped by hands that didn't believe in luxury. She didn't glance at the guards that flanked the entrance, she didn't pause as servants bowed low to her from the shadows, eyes never daring to rise. She led Charles down a wide corridor, walls etched with what looked like battle scenes, queens with weapons drawn, blood spilled in stone relief. Every image had one figure larger than the rest, always her. They came to a massive stone table, more war council than royal comfort, and a sunken lounge set off to the side. Sivera turned and leaned against the table. "You killed 3 elite scouts with no hesitation," she said finally. "Why?" Charles shrugged. "They had weapons. You didn't." "Seems simple enough. No mercenary does anything simple without a price." "I didn't say I was cheap." "Didn't say you were," she shot back. "But I don't repay life debts with coin." He narrowed his eyes. "Then what's the going rate these days for saving a queen?" She stepped closer. He could smell her now. "No one touches me without permission," she said. "You did. You grabbed my arm, pulled me up. You were bleeding still," she whispered. "You touched me." Charles didn't flinch. "And I liked it." Her hand rose and landed lightly on his chest. "I repay my debts in full," she said. "But I don't give gifts. I give challenges." "Not here to play games," Charles said. "Oh, this isn't a game. I don't play, I conquer." Then she turned and walked away, calling over her shoulder without looking back, "You'll stay the night." He didn't move. Hours later, he stood at the balcony of a guest chamber far too lavish for a mercenary. A soft knock broke his focus, and the door opened without waiting for his response. Sivera stood there, she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I told my attendants I was meditating," she said, walking toward him. "I'm guessing that's a lie." "Guess again." She stopped close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "You saved me," she said. "You looked death in the eye and didn't flinch. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't beg for reward. That's rare. I'm not used to being denied, are you? He said. Her laugh was quiet, dangerous. I'm not used to being touched, she reached up, until today. Charles caught her wrist, gently but firmly. His voice was low. Careful. Her gaze flared. Why do you think I'm fragile? No, he said. I think I am. And then the tension snapped. Her lips were on his. He responded the only way he knew how, hands tangled, he shoved her against the wall hard enough to make her gasp and grin. She loved it. So did he. They didn't speak after that. The night burned slow and hard, clothes vanished when it was over. They lay tangled in silence, sweat cooling between them. You still think this is a game? He asked. She turned her head, eyes half-lidded. I think, she said slowly, you're a very dangerous man, and you're not done with me yet. She smiled. Not even close. Charles didn't sleep. Queens didn't get that luxury. She lay with her back to him, the faint rise and fall of her breathing was the only sign she was still in the room. Charles sat up on the edge of the bed. He'd had meaningless nights before, this was something else. Something neither of them had planned. It had started as a dominance game. You thinking of running already? She said. Charles didn't turn. I didn't know I was on a leash. You are mine tonight. That was tonight, he said finally, glancing back. It's morning now. Sivera smiled. Funny, I don't recall dismissing you. He stared at her, still lying there, her body sprawled across the sheets like a goddess who knew damn well the temple was hers. Charles didn't belong to anyone, that was rule one, but he didn't move. I could order you to stay, she said, trailing her fingers across the curve of his shoulder. He caught her hand mid-path, holding it in place. Try it. I like you. She said, you're not afraid of me. Maybe I should be. She leaned in, lips brushing the corner of his jaw. That's why I chose you. He turned toward her fully. Now, chose? I saw you land 2 days ago, she said casually. You weren't supposed to be anywhere near my jungle, and yet here you are. Charles blinked. You're saying the ambush was real? She sat up. But fate, it seems, has a sense of humor. You think this is fate? She laughed. No, I think this is mine. Later that day, they dressed in silence. When Charles opened the door, a pair of guards stood waiting. One of them offered a short bow. The Queen requests your presence at midday in the war chamber, he said. Charles raised an eyebrow. The guard didn't flinch, her words carried weight. 2 hours later, they entered the war chamber. A massive circular table stood at its center, embedded with a three-dimensional map of the territory, red markers flashing along the borderlands. Sivera stood at the head of the table, surrounded by advisors, green-skinned, silent. When Charles entered, she was mid-sentence. If they cross again, we meet them with steel, not words. I've tolerated too many incursions. No more. Charles stood off to the side, arms crossed. The power she wore here was different than in bed. One of the generals cleared his throat, eyeing Charles with barely concealed disdain. And this human mercenary, what role does he serve in this council? Sivera didn't blink. He saved my life. My queen, the general said stiffly, and now he shares your bed. She turned slowly. Do you wish to question my judgment, Commander VE? Of course not, my queen. She turned back to the table. Good. Because this mercenary is no longer just a visitor. He is under my protection. When the meeting ended, Sivera didn't wait for him. Charles followed at a distance until she finally veered down a private corridor, away from the others. He caught up, grabbed her arm, and pulled her into an alcove. What the hell is this? He demanded, eyes narrowed. What? You're making declarations in front of your council about me. I meant them. I don't care who you meant, he snapped. You put a target on my back, and now half your court thinks I'm sleeping my way into power. Her smile came slow. Aren't you? No. He stared at her. I came because you called. Not for politics. You think this is about politics? You think I parade men in front of my generals like some insecure warlord? Then what is this? He demanded. Her eyes bored into his. You touched me. You tasted me. And now you stay. That wasn't the deal. It was never a deal, she said, close enough that he felt her breath. He realized he might be in deeper than he thought. The Queen didn't just want a night, she wanted everything. Charles didn't sleep that night either. He lay on the edge of the oversized bed, fully dressed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sivera, the alien queen who kissed like fire and declared him hers like she was claiming territory. Charles didn't like being claimed, but he also hadn't walked away. That part bugged him more than anything. He rose before dawn, slipping out into the hall with steps silent from years of experience. The guards didn't stop him, they didn't even blink. But he felt their eyes on him, like invisible chains. The palace gates were just beyond the main court, and then he saw her. Sivera stood there in a thin royal robe that clung to her form, dark red with gold trim, parted just enough to hint at curves that had already driven him half crazy. Her hair was slicked back, impossibly perfect. You thought you'd leave before the sun rose, she asked. I thought I'd spare you the awkward goodbye, he said. Cowardly move for someone who fought off 3 trained killers. He stopped 3 steps short of her. Whatever this is, he said, you don't want me. You want control. She smiled slowly. Who said anything about chains? She asked. He kept walking. You think this is about power? I don't play at power. I conquer it, she said. I need a fire that doesn't ask permission. You don't get to play both sides, Charles. You want the man or the weapon? She looked up at him, unflinching. I want both. But you haven't earned the right to ask me to choose. He reached out, grabbed the flask from her hand, and took a swig. It scorched his throat, but he didn't cough. He set it down hard. You think you own me? He said, voice low. No, she said, stepping closer. I need you. And that's worse. The honesty in that landed harder than any insult. He didn't. Later, the border outpost buzzed with energy. Sivera stood at the head of the command table, flanked by commanders and tacticians. Charles stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching how she commanded a room with 2 words. Watching how the men twice her size deferred like dogs that feared the leash. Halfway through a debriefing, her chief strategist, Commander V, cleared his throat. Should we ask your companion for input, my queen? Or is he only here for morale? It was quiet after that. Then, calmly, without a word, she stepped forward and struck V across the face. Vec staggered, holding his jaw, his eyes went wide. My queen. Speak again, Commander, she said coldly, and I'll remove your tongue and replace it with silence. Nobody spoke again. Sivera turned to Charles. They didn't speak until nightfall, in the training yard, after sunset, while he punished a set of wooden dummies with hand-to-hand drills meant to bleed frustration out of his knuckles. You don't have to fight them, he said without looking at her. I wasn't, she turned. Then what was that display? Clarification. I don't tolerate disrespect. Especially not toward things I care about. He stilled. You care now. She didn't smile. I crave, she whispered. That's more dangerous. I won't be a possession, he said. Good, she whispered, stepping into him. I want a partner, one who can hold me down when I try to burn the world. He grabbed her wrist. You're playing a dangerous game. Her breath hitched. And you love it. This time, when they collided, it wasn't about dominance. This was war, and they were both winning. Afterward, they lay in the training yard, half-dressed, dirt-streaked, sweat-slick skin. He traced the inside of her wrist with one finger, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. "You ever get tired of fighting?" he asked quietly. "No," she closed her eyes. "I get tired of being alone. But I'd rather burn than beg." Charles rolled onto his side, pulled her closer. "You don't have to do either," he said. The days blurred. Routine gave way to ritual, and Charles found himself swept into a rhythm that didn't feel like captivity but didn't quite feel like freedom either. Each morning, he trained with Sivers Royal Guards. Each afternoon, he accompanied her through war meetings, diplomatic receptions, intelligence briefings. Each night was fire and surrender. Every corner of the palace held echoes of them now, hallways where fingers brushed in passing, chambers where they exchanged glances that said too much, too loud, too often. They were seated side by side in a high council room, flanked by nobles and warlords who only spoke when Sivera gave them room to breathe. Her power wasn't just political. That night, they didn't make it to the bed. He found her on the balcony, staring out at the jungle under moonlight. "You're quiet," she said, without turning. "You're distracting," he replied. She smirked. "Good." He stepped behind her, close enough for his breath to brush her shoulder. "You keep pulling me deeper." She turned. "Yet you keep coming. I should walk away." "Then walk." He kissed her instead. It wasn't like before, it was slower. They barely made it past the curtains. By the end, they collapsed in a heap. She rested her head on his chest, and for the first time, she whispered something he didn't expect, "I dream of you." Charles looked down at her. "That's dangerous." "Yes," she said, "and it's not stopping." The next day, something changed. She kept him close again, but her touch was less possessive, more protective. She watched him from across council tables like he was the only one in the room. When advisors questioned him, her eyes narrowed, when nobles sneered, her voice cut them down without effort. And that's what scared him, because he wasn't just staying. He was starting to need her. Late that night, in her quarters, he paced by the fire while she undressed in the adjoining chamber. "You ever wonder where this is going?" he asked. She stepped out in a dark robe, barefoot, unguarded in a way she never was in public. "No," she said softly. "I know exactly where it's going." He looked at her. "And where is that?" She stepped into him, wrapped her arms around his neck. "To obsession." He pulled back enough to look in her eyes. "That's not a plan. It's not supposed to be." She kissed his jaw. "Plans are for people who don't already know how it ends. You think this ends with us walking away?" She laughed, softly, bitter and beautiful. "No. I think it ends with someone bleeding." They didn't sleep. She ran fingers through his hair, slow and gentle. "You shouldn't be this close," she whispered. Then pushed him away. She didn't. Morning came too fast, so did the knock at her chamber door. Siva rose quickly, wrapping herself in a robe. Her tone shifted instantly. "What is it?" A voice came through the door. "Scouts report movement at the northeast ridge. Enemy symbols, 50, maybe more, armed." Charles sat up, alert. They both knew what it meant. "This isn't a threat," he said. "It's an invasion." She nodded once. "They want the throne." "No," Charles said, rising. "They want you." They didn't speak as they dressed. Siver buckled her armored belt, her eyes flicking once toward Charles. His gear was already strapped and loaded, a black rifle slung over his shoulder, sidearm on his hip. The soldier in him had come alive again. "You think they'll hit the wall directly?" he asked as they marched toward the command deck. "They've waited for the perfect moment," she said. Now they think they can catch me distracted. His jaw tightened. They're not wrong. Her hand brushed his lightly. No, they're not. The palace pulsed with movement. Guards hustled into position, war banners were lowered from balconies, watchtowers buzzed with messages from scouts scattered through the jungle. The war room was alive with tension, maps lit up with red zones and troop markers. Advisors marked numbers and predictions. But the moment Sivir entered, the chaos folded inward. All eyes went to her. Charles stood just behind her. Vex, the old commander she'd once slapped for disrespecting him, gave a subtle nod. The enemy force is smaller than expected, V reported. But they're disciplined, and they're not marching, they're hunting. Sivir leaned forward, hands on the edge of the table. What's their target? They haven't hit supply lines, no interest in outposts. Charles stepped closer. It's an extraction. V frowned. Meaning? Charles looked at Sivir. They're not here for the palace. They're here for you. Silence thickened the air. That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of the enemy beyond the walls, but because Charles wasn't in her bed. He'd returned to his guest quarters without a word, leaving only a look behind. She stood on the balcony, a blade strapped to her thigh. Footsteps approached behind her. I thought you left, she said without turning. I should have, Charles answered, but I didn't. She turned to him. You want to say something? She said, say it. I don't know what this is anymore. She stepped toward him. It's real, is it? His voice cracked. Because I feel like I'm just part of the performance now. You think I'm using you. I think you don't know what to do with someone who pushes back. He said, you call it obsession, but it's control. You pull me close, then hold me at arm's length. You want me when it burns, but never when it's quiet. Her eyes flashed. That's not fair. Then she stepped close again. You think I don't feel it too? He didn't answer. She grabbed his face with both hands, pulled him down to her mouth, and kissed him. When she pulled back, her voice dropped to something ragged. You walk away now, she said. You'll carry this for the rest of your life. I already will, he said. Then he turned and walked toward the door, and for the first time since she'd met him, she let him go. Charles didn't make it to the outer corridor because he heard the alarm, a single shrill wail split the air. Then came the voice, enemies breaching Sector 3, repeat, breach confirmed. Defensive perimeter compromised. But as he rounded the corner into the northern hall, what he saw made his blood run cold. They were already inside, dozens of them, slim armor, tribal markings, blades in both hands, moving silent and fast through the shadows like ghosts. They were heading straight for her chamber. He didn't hesitate. He cut 3 of them down before they knew he was there, the rest scattered. In that moment, he wasn't her lover, he was her weapon. He found her already in motion, 2 guards down at her feet, sword in hand, fury on her face. When she saw him, she didn't smile, but she met him with a nod, and together, they fought. When the last attacker fell, the hall was thick with smoke and blood. Sivir turned, chest heaving, arm cut and bleeding, but her eyes locked on him. You came back, she said. I didn't leave. I thought I could let you go, Charles whispered against her neck. But I lied, she said. He exhaled slowly. Me too. The enemy was defeated but not destroyed, they'd retreated fast and clean. This hadn't been about conquest, it had been a message, you are vulnerable. You are not untouchable. Charles stood beside her at the head of the table, blood drawing on his collarbone. Your enemies won't stop, he said. They know you care about something now, she said. No, she said softly, they know I care about someone. They have 2 hours before the second wave hits. That's what the scout said. But Charles didn't believe it. Enemies didn't announce themselves with clean time frames. They struck when you bled. And Sivera's kingdom was bleeding now. Charles stood over the war table with Vex and the other generals watching the holographic projections flicker and shift, enemy formations moving faster than expected, east and west at once. "Pull the jungle guards from the southwest ridge line," Charles said, eyes locked on the moving red markers. "They're baiting us with that light artillery on the north wall. They want you to overcommit." Vex grunted. "They want her. We already had that talk. And they're not getting her." Sivera entered the chamber like thunder. "They'll breach the outer gate in less than 40 minutes. We hold here," Charles said. He moved to her side, voice low. "You don't have to carry this on your own." She didn't look at him. "I'm a queen." "I do." "No," he said sharper than he meant. "You choose to. You said you didn't want to be a possession." "I'm not," she replied. "But I'm not a bystander either." He turned to her. "Then fight beside me, not behind me." He stepped close enough that no one else could hear what he said next. "I already am." The attack hit before the sun rose. Charles led the outer line himself, rifle tight to his chest, knife strapped to his thigh. The palace courtyard had been transformed into a war zone, barricades, mounted blasters, close-quarter kill zones. And he was in the middle of it all. Sivera stood on the high steps, armor gleaming, sword drawn. Her voice rang out over the chaos, giving orders with terrifying precision. She was no longer just a queen, and Charles knew that's what they were after. Wave after wave charged the barricades, throwing bodies forward like sacrifice meant glory. Charles ducked under the blast of a grenade, rolled behind cover, came up firing. Sector 9 breached. A voice screamed through the comms, "Sivera's hall is exposed." He moved. He found her in the upper corridor, sword-stained, face cut. 3 enemy soldiers lay at her feet. She was already in motion. "Back," she said between breaths. He grabbed her arm. "This isn't the moment to be stubborn." "I don't run," she said. "I'm not asking you to run," he said. "I'm asking you to survive." Another explosion rocked the floor beneath them. He grabbed her waist and pulled her out of the line of fire, just as the arch behind them collapsed. They fell hard, her on top of him, both covered in dust and smoke. "Still think you're not mine," she whispered. "I'm starting to think we don't belong to anyone but this," he said, pulling her closer. They fought side by side for the next hour. Every inch of the palace floor was claimed and reclaimed in blood. Sivera's guards held the inner gate. Charles found himself dragging wounded from the lines between reloads. His hand bled, his ribs were cracked, but he didn't care, because every time he looked across the battle and saw her swinging, screaming, standing, he felt it again, that burning thing he hadn't named yet. Something bigger than desire, bigger than rage. The final push came at sunset. The enemy tried one last coordinated assault, 3 fronts, a suicide wave to break the core. It almost worked, until Sivera mounted the outer wall herself. She leapt into the fray like death wrapped in armor, blade a blur, eyes blazing with fire that terrified the men around her more than any army ever could. Charles followed, and together they ended it. By the time the last soldier fell, the jungle was silent again. Sivera stood in the middle of the courtyard, blood drying on her face, her chest rising and falling in hard, shallow breaths. Charles limped to her side and reached for her hand. He wrapped his fingers around hers, and she held on. That night, they didn't go to her chambers. They sat by the fire in the war hall, the place where they'd once fought with words instead of weapons. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I should have died today," she murmured. He exhaled slowly. "You didn't." Her fingers traced the back of his hand. "You were right, you know, about what? I don't want control." Her voice cracked. "I just didn't know how to let someone fight beside me without it feeling like weakness." "It's not weakness," he said. "It's trust." She nodded. They sat there for a long time. Then she said the one thing neither of them had dared speak until now, "I don't want you to leave." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I wasn't planning to." She looked up at him. "You belong to me now." "I think I always did," he smiled. The palace was quiet after the blood, the fire, the screaming. It felt wrong, as if silence itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if anything could survive what came before. Sivir sat alone in the royal war chamber, stripped of armor, wrapped in a dark robe, her elbows on the map table where so many battles had been planned and lost. The door opened behind her. She didn't look up. "I said I didn't want interruptions." Charles stepped in anyway, bruised and still limping. "I'm not an interruption." She closed her eyes. "Of course it's you, the one person I couldn't fight off." "I thought you were resting," she said without turning. "I thought you knew me better than that." He walked to the other side of the table and rested both hands on the smooth stone, his knuckles were still bandaged. She looked up finally, meeting his gaze, and for once, she didn't wear the crown in her expression. "I almost lost everything today," she said quietly. He didn't blink. "You didn't." "But I will." "No." He walked around the table and stood in front of her. "I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." She laughed bitterly. "That's a dangerous promise. I've made worse." He reached down, gently pulled her up by the hand, and drew her into him, not to kiss her, just to hold her. "You should hate me," she murmured. "I kept you here. I used you. I played you like everyone else." Charles touched her chin and lifted her face until their eyes met. "Don't give yourself too much credit." Her brow arched, surprised. He smiled. "You didn't trap me, Sivra. You called me, and I came. You think I stayed because of," he leaned in closer, the heat of his breath teasing her lips, "because you command a room?" She shook her head. "Because you fight like hell for what you believe in, even when it cost you everything. And I wanted to see what would happen if someone fought for you." Her lips parted, and then they were kissing. Later, they lay tangled in the war hall by the fire. The place where they'd first fought with words. Instead of weapons. She leaned her head on his chest. "I wasn't going anywhere," she whispered. He didn't answer. Then he said, "Then live." "With you?" He didn't flinch. "Yeah, with me." That dawn, Sivir addressed the council in the main hall, not just generals, not just nobles, but civilians, healers, builders, survivors. Charles stood behind her, not as a shadow, not as a trophy, but as her equal. She spoke, not with a speech, but with a choice. "I have ruled with fire," she said, voice clear, "but now I offer something else. I offer truth and unity and a future, not shaped by fear, but forged by those strong enough to change." They stood, one by one. That night, Charles and Sivira sat on the palace steps, legs stretched out before them, a bottle between them, and the stars above. "You're really doing it," he nudged her shoulder. "So are you," she tilted her head. "That scare you a little?" he smiled. "Good." She leaned against him. "You ever think we'd end up here?" "No," he said, "but I'm glad we did." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're not mine anymore." "No," he said, "we're ours now." And for once, she didn't correct him. She just took his hand. The fire in the royal chamber burned low. Outside, the world was quiet, no drums of war, no marching feet, just stillness. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't carry threat. It carried peace. Years later, the jungle was quiet that morning, thick with dew and sun slicing through the trees in soft golden beams. The palace had changed. Gone were the towering barricades. The scarred stone walls had been rebuilt, but not to intimidate, just to endure. Vines grew wild around the spires, the hard edges had softened. The structure breathed again, alive. It was no longer a fortress. It was a home. In the courtyard, under the shade of a wide canopy tree, Charles sat in a chair made of dark nexary wood, half listening to the slow rhythm of hammers in the distance as artisans worked on the new atrium. He looked older now, thicker lines around the eyes, faint streaks of silver at his temples, a scar across his collarbone from battles he barely remembered. His wrist still bore the permanent mark. He was waiting, and then he heard her voice. "You're letting them plant too many trees." He didn't need to turn. "They're just trees. They're everywhere. I liked it better when this place was terrifying." He smiled. "You were terrifying. I still am." She took the seat beside him without asking, wearing a long deep blue wrap that matched the small crest embroidered near her collarbone, now a shared symbol known across the region. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Remember when this was all rubble?" she murmured. "Yeah," he said. "I remember dragging your unconscious body off this very floor while dodging blades. You were bleeding. You bit me. You liked it." He laughed under his breath. "Still do." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the birds, the occasional distant clang of metal, the low murmur of palace life. Everything was different, and everything still pulsed with what they'd built. 10 years had passed since the war, since the attack that almost took her, since the night she told him he belonged to her. The people had stopped calling Charles a mercenary. Now they called him Consort General, an awkward title he never cared for, but one he carried with quiet pride. He didn't rule, but he stood beside the woman who did. Together, they had rebuilt not just a palace, but an entire region, trade routes stabilized, border tribes aligned, conflicts, while never gone, had become rare, settled with diplomacy more often than blood. But that didn't mean their fire had dimmed, if anything, it had evolved. "You know," she said, lifting her head and resting her chin on her hand, eyes scanning his face, "when I first saw you, I thought you were a problem." He arched a brow. "And now? Now I know I was right." He laughed. "Then you regret it?" She studied him. "What, you mean the United States?" "No," he said, "everything we burned down to build this." She didn't answer immediately. She reached for his hand, lifted it between them, pressed her lips to the faded mark on his wrist. "I don't regret 1 second of it," she said softly. "Even when it almost killed us both, especially then." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that held no rush, no urgency, just years of understanding layered between skin and breath. When he pulled back, he whispered, "I would have followed you into hell." "You did," she said, "and then you pulled me out of it." They rose together and walked through the palace garden, past young guards standing straight in fresh armor, past children racing between stone paths, laughter echoing through the trees. Sivert paused at the edge of a newly built training field, where 2 girls sparred under the guidance of an instructor. Both wore simple practice tunics, their green skin shining under the morning light, dark hair tied back tight. One moved like a shadow, fluid, patient, calculating. The other struck with speed and aggression, her footwork sharp and fierce. Charles stepped up beside Zebra, arms crossed, watching them with quiet pride. "They're getting fast," he said. "They're getting dangerous," she corrected, a note of satisfaction in her voice. She almost broke that stance. "You mean your stance?" "I mean my legacy." She frowned at the instructor's mock severity as he called for a break. Both girls dropped into practiced bows. "Mothers," the fierce one said, wiping sweat from her brow. "Report," Sivera said. The quieter girl stepped forward first. "Taran almost broke my grip. She used the sweep we learned yesterday. I didn't see it coming." "That's because you overextend," Sivera said calmly. "But your recovery was better than last time." "And she bit me," Taran muttered. Charles fought a grin. "Good instincts." "See, Taran," Sivera said, elbowing her sister. Father says it's effective. Sivur gave Charles a look. You really taught her to bite during combat? It worked on you. That earned him a playful shove. Back to work, Sivur told the girls. And no biting unless you're losing. The girls returned to the field, laughing, the pressure of legacy softened by the warmth in their bond. Sivur turned to Charles. They're going to be better than both of us. He nodded. That's the point. That evening, the palace balcony glowed with soft lantern light, the jungle humming in the distance. Charles sat on the edge of the railing, sipping from a glass of local spiced wine. Sivur stood behind him, arms wrapped loosely around his shoulders, her chin resting on his head. You know what today is? She asked. Besides the day I almost lost an argument with an 11-year-old about battle tactics. She smiled. It's the day you saved me. Charles tilted his head. I thought that was every day. No, she said, more serious now. I mean the first day in the jungle, when you didn't know who I was, when you saw a stranger and still stepped into a fight that wasn't yours. He was quiet for a beat. Yeah, I remember. You could have walked away. I should have, but I didn't. He looked up at her, brow furrowed. Why are you bringing this up? Because I think back then I didn't understand what that meant, to be chosen like that. Not for power, not for a throne, but because someone saw you, just you, and still didn't flinch. He turned fully to her, letting her words settle between them. And now? Now I flinch, she said softly. Every time I think about what it would have been like if you had walked away. Charles took her face in his hands, rough thumbs brushing her cheeks. I didn't. And I never will. She whispered, then stay with me as long as you want. He smiled. I already have.